Testing, testing. Can you hear me in the back there? Thank you.
We're going to hear it now.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay, and then is that your first one?
Yes. And yeah, I'm not going to be able to do full slide because I haven't figured out how to do Prezi yet. I've seen it, but I haven't.
So I hope
Okay.
then you can just hit stop.
Right. Thanks for your help, Judy. All right. Okay, greetings everyone. My name is Joel Mackall, and I'm going to get started right away. Got a lot of stuff, high definition, high resolution kind of presentation, and not a lot of time to get it done in. This is called The Genealogy of African America and Anti-Blackness in Boston. I'm a local adult education or educator. I teach all ages. I run tours walking in the North End as well as van tours in the summer. We start up in Roxbury and come all the way down. Sometimes we go out to the Royal House as well. And so in my movements, in my love of history, I came across History Camp a couple years ago, and I said, let me try to share some of the latest ideas. One problem is they're very latest ideas. So I had a lot of information. I had to try to pull out enough to bring something coherent here. So I hope you bear with me. I apologize, I have some things to edit inside and move and uncover inside the PowerPoint. So I'm not gonna go to full screen. This is intentional. I have some technician difficulties, but I do know that I'm not in full screen. But all right, here we go. So where I want to take you today is through a quick discussion about Africa, Black folks, anti-Blackness, and genealogy. Then we're going to talk a little bit about some local history here with someone who I refer to as Queen Kicked. And then we're going to talk about some happenings in the 1720s in this very immediate area with some servants. And if I have time, I'm going to try to get into David Walker and into the Willie Bennett lineup that happened in the late 1980s. And hopefully we'll have enough time for any questions at the end of that. There we go. Okay, this presentation is a presentation of questions. So like I said, I'm working on a lot of stuff, trying to process a lot of things, but I'm coming up with probably more questions than answers. And I wanted to start off with two short clips and an image to kind of frame what I'm talking about. I'm going to, well, you know what? I don't know if I had the audio set up for this. Let's see. This one doesn't have audio, but let's go for it. This is only 2 minutes long, okay? You're looking at a timeline here of slave ships. It's a big data project some kids did at I'm not sure where, but it's showing the departure of slave ships out of Africa. And you can see the timeline down here at the bottom. Okay, I'm just going to pause it there. I'm a little bit after the time where we're going to talk about Queen kicked. I'm going to restart it. You might see some patterns. I want to pause here also, right at the turn of this century. You might start to notice something also in the visual graph down here. I'm going to pause here. And then finally, I'm going to pause right here. Okay? Does anybody know why I did the last two pauses? The first pause was 1802. That was when the island of Haiti wrote their first constitution. And the 1808 is, any constitutional experts here? That's when they outlawed the slave trade from the Constitution in the beginning. Okay, so that was from 1793 or so, another 15, 16 years of affirmative action, so to speak, of trade, what they called the trade. Okay? The second piece that I'd like to show, just want you to hold on to that, is this is an encounter between this man and a guy who was in a car passing by. And this man is the stepfather of Eric Garner, who was, if you recall from the attack from the police, was choked to death. And his saying was, "I can't breathe." And this has to do a lot with what I'm going to touch on later.
Sorry for your loss, but I'm gonna be upset. Regardless,
You ain't on it what I'm saying.
I can't shake it.
No, I'm not asking him, but not asking junkies here, all over. Because they know there's a lot of people getting locked up for nothing.
I understand that, but it's like, what could be done? You know, talking, what could, I'm sorry, what could possibly be done? The message is that it's different for them than for us. And for years and years, we've been fighting and fighting and fighting, and nothing has changed. It's wrong. It's wrong.
Okay.
It's wrong.
But listen to this then. Now, you're hollering this wrong, right? When I was out here marching, Where was you at?
I was there. I had pictures.
No, I'm talking about
I was right up there. I was there. I was right there. I was right there. I was there, Mr. Gardner. Every step of the way, I had pictures, everything. And you know, it's just gotten, I was doing everything peacefully, but it's gotten to the point where it's wrong.
We all are hurt.
It's like, where are we headed for? What's the future for me? What's the future for me? You know what I'm saying? For my child, for my son. What is his future?
Okay. That's really emotional. But I think it's important in the discussion that I want to have about this history here, because he's consoled after, you know, in this confrontation. He erroneously calls him Mr. Garner, but that's actually Benjamin Carr, who is Eric Garner's stepfather. And this is just a fellow on the street who was leaving the protests where they were having that. And I raised that to point out, oh, I'm sorry, I have one more thing here. And this one I do want to, oops. This one I do want to zoom in a little bit more. This picture here is done by some artist. I think I really don't know where I got it, somewhere out in the Twitter sphere. But this is a wonderful drawing that I think shows a lot about genealogy. And what it's referring to is a protest that was done by this woman, Aisha Evans, in Baton Rouge. And you can see that when she was at the protest, she calmly was taken away. And some artist, some creative person has made a link, a genealogical link here in their art. And you can see that this harkens back to a few centuries before the time of this protest of the murders of Alton Sterling and Baton Rouge. And so what I'd like to just set the table with here is that this first picture, and I wish I had the time to get your feedback on what you think. If you have index cards, you can leave your ideas. But I think the first image shows the magnitude of Africa's human wound, that something happened in those slave ship holds. The slave ships are called slavers. And in the wakes of those ships, some folks who are theorizing this new idea of Afro-pessimism and anti-blackness, they use these ideas to create a new vocabulary to discuss the magnitude of this historical event. What this man, I still haven't given him a name or found out his name, but I think what he asks is, what is my future? What is black futurity, actually? And I think that is something that is very, very important that he raises, how vulnerable it is. And the last piece that this picture does in tying today with yesterday, and you can see the young kids are doing it on the Twitter sphere and the Facebook and all of that, whether they have a conceptual idea of this or they're into the big data side or into the videography side of that, they're making these connections in their creativity and their art. And I think that's very important. It's something also that we as historians need to get grasp of. So what I'd like to do is take these kind of big concepts and quickly apply them to these four different people. The first person that I'd like to take a look at, I'm calling her Queen Kicked. And to preface her story, in my research, and anyone who has access to the Suffolk files over at UMass Boston, or has any time or would like to help me investigate this, I could use a lot of help. It's very confusing, but trying to figure out where this woman came from. She ended up at Samuel Maverick's farm out in Noddles Island, what it was called, which is where Logan Airport, is just east of Logan Airport is, or west of Logan Airport. And there's the story being 3 war zones, command and control up in Europe. I don't have a way to point to this. The command and control up here, the battlefield here in Europe, and this is from the time frame from which we're drawing her life is the early 1600s. This is a map of Angola and Congo at the time. The Portuguese had been there 100 years. The original raiding that they did in West Africa had organized and changed into a very chaotic situation. But you can see from all the dots that went across the screen, there's a sustained trade, what the Europeans would call trade, going on across to the 3rd zone, which would be the kind of prisoner of war camps, which would be in the Caribbean or North America or South America. Now, Providence Island was it was down here off the coast of Nicaragua in the Caribbean Ocean. And there was a single point of white supremacy, being the European connection, the forts in Africa, the Caribbean connections, and the North American connections. There was trade between those islands and the New England. And it's supposed that the Africans that were on this island were brought up to Boston and that she was one of those people. Were they from Angola? Were they from, depending if her original ship was the Dutch or if it was actually the Portuguese or the Spanish. But leaving from central southern Africa all the way over to the islands, there's a second ship, much like the Amistad was going from one end of Cuba to the other. It's a second ship that would be taking these Africans going up here. And my predecessor was talking about Marblehead and the cod trade. That's a very understudied commerce that's going on between intercolonial commerce. But at any rate, that slaving system dropped this woman at a farm, and a traveler had noted this in his diary, and I'm just going to read directly off it. The 2nd of October, about 9 o'clock in the morning, Mr. Maverick's Negro woman came to my chamber window, and in her own country language in tunes sang very loud and shrill. Going out to her, she used a great deal of respect toward me and willingly would have expressed her grief in English, but I apprehended it by her countenance and deportment, whereupon I repaired to my host to learn of him the cause and resolved to entreat him in her behalf, for that I understood before that she had been a queen in her own country, and observed a very humble and dutiful garb used towards her by another Negro who was her maid. Mr. Maverick was desirous to have a breed of Negroes, and therefore seeing she would not yield by persuasions to company with the Negro young man he had in his house, he commanded him, willed she, nilled she, go to bed to her, which was no sooner done, but she kicked him out again. This she took in high disdain beyond her slavery, and this was the cause of her grief. There's a full book by Wendy Ann Warren on New England slavery, and she remarks that this is the story of a rape of a woman. This is this was written in the 1670s, but it took place from a trip that he was on in 1637, 38. So reading that, and with those questions in mind about the magnitude of the slaving system and, and anti-blackness, you have to forgive me, I still draw at a 3rd grade level, but it really helps me in trying to uncover what I'm trying to learn or dissect and recreate. But I started to draw this, and I wish I had a pointer. I broke it down. Came to my window of 9 o'clock, so something is happening here. She's talking in her own language. What was that language? Was it a West African language? Was it a Central African language? What words was she using? This is something that we can put a few different languages down and try to figure out what was going on. Jocelyn entreated or asked, having witnessed this woman come shrieking at him, asked Maverick here, because, and in the way he says it in that little journal entry, he represents her as a queen before her slave status, so that this was something about her status. And Maverick replied he was desirous to have a breed of Negroes. It's interesting. She would not yield by persuasions to company with a Negro man, and he had a Negro man, okay? So this idea of complete authority and power, it made me wonder what was the travels through that slaving system of both Queen Kicked and the Negro man. Having been on two slavers, they might have seen some really incredible violence, and to have ended up here in the harbor, in Boston Harbor, in this situation. Were they related? Were they kin? You never know. It's hard to say. And then nilled and kicked again. So Queen Kicked, she stood up. So what I'm thinking is 1 through 4 is anti-blackness. A subject, a maverick of whiteness, structuring himself, worlding the world. Okay, whereas the black are two objects, and they're the slave other. What became of Queen Kicked? Was she sold? Was she destroyed? Did she destroy herself? I'm not sure, but the interesting thing, James Baldwin has a quote here that makes me see this woman in a very powerful light. All you ever told in this country about being black is that it's a terrible, terrible thing to be. Now, in order to survive this, you have to really dig down into yourself and recreate yourself, really according to no image which yet exists in America. You have to impose, in fact, this may sound very strange, you have to decide who you are and force the world to deal with you, not with its idea of you. Now, her refusal of his power and control over her life at this stage is interesting. Now, suppose that the breeding had gone through and he had more Negroes enslaved. Would they have any better ability to dig down into themselves, okay, in order to refuse in the next generation, okay? That's going back to that idea of black futurity and how precarious it is, okay? The next piece we're going to look at is if we're back at, there's not a picture of East Boston in this, this redrawn picture, but this is what it would have looked like in around the time of Queen Kicked. And if you jump ahead another century, the map, you're going to see the small settlement has turned into quite something else, and business is starting to happen. And so you've got the same thing, of which you can see we are right over here on Tremont. And that's from the three mountains, the tri-mountains that were cut down in order to set this all up. So what are we talking about here? Well, I paused a couple of times in the big data picture at 1700, which is when the slaving system was a free, open market. Okay, that's when the merchant class had gotten up strong enough so that they said, okay, we're not going to pay your charters and your taxes and all of that, your royal companies. So That's when ships started to leave out of here and go all the way. It was affordable enough to go all the way to Madagascar. And so you'll notice in that big data picture, that's when everything just starts really blowing up. You're getting towards the peak of slavery in Boston in the 1720s, 30s, and 40s. And there's a group of, well, there's one man who's a Negro servant, and it refers to a barn being burnt down and a warehouse down here on a long wharf. This is State Street here, and they called this Lovell's Lane, and what was the other one? Pudding Lane, right here. Okay, I don't know what those streets are today, but they're right down the street. And this is printed by Benjamin Franklin. This is an article, I believe from the Current. I haven't written it down, but it's the account of a Negro man suspected of setting this house on fire, and he's been committed to prison to go on to trial. And so this is in the Suffolk Records, which I have a Facebook group on Hidden History of Black Boston, and there's a kind of a crowd sourcing of translating. So I'm going over to the Suffolk files and bringing them back to the Facebook page, and then other people are trying to figure out what the heck this cursive is talking about. So we're slowly going through it, but it's just fascinating stuff. And what it immediately brought to mind, talking about that thread, that genealogy, is that once they apprehended Diego, they apprehended him. He confessed, and there's remarks of terrified Bostonians, and they sought the Confederates of Diego. They mobilized, they had patrols, and you get this sense of overwhelming surveillance of the Negro population. The patrols, they had curfews, and they had a ban of arms for Indians, mulattoes, and Negroes. And then the militia became a permanent watch. Now, what interests me here is that when they list the prisoners, they had these other Negro servants. So Tom, a servant of such and such, Hercules, Lisbon, Cato, Will, and Chambers. Of these here, Diego was the only one who was executed. He was executed, they think, in June or July. And the other ones, they were acquitted. And they don't say what happened to them. From all the history that I've read, there was that, I don't know if it's negrophobia, negrophilia, of, okay, I've established a farm and my slaves don't want to work. How do I keep them working? And how do I keep them terrorized enough to not want to leave? But how do I not damage them too much so that I cannot get the maximum productivity out of the workforce? So a lot of slaves would have been sold or rebranded to other places, but they don't say what happened to these ones. Some in the Caribbean revolts, just as a side note, in the Caribbean revolts, a lot of folks exchanged rebelling slaves just to foment new rebellions in the place that they sent them to. I think there's one Simbo or Sambo, one example of an enslaved African who revolted in Jamaica, got sent to Haiti, revolted in Haiti, got sent to New Orleans, revolted in New Orleans, all before, 1811 and in that time about. So it would be interesting to find out what was the fate of these other men. And the genealogy that I imagined is, okay, yeah, it's colonial Boston, yeah, it's 1720s, but would those men feel any different than Willie Bennett felt in 1989 when his house was his family was assaulted. He was dragged out of his house, and he was lined up. There was no. It's another correlation. I'm just thinking up this right now. Is that in the day they didn't like to say slave in the official documents. They didn't like to say enslaved or African enslaved or whatever. In the Willie Bennett case, they didn't actually charge him with anything, okay, because there wasn't enough evidence. There was just hearsay, and they knew that. But how the media covered it, how the state covered it, was a whole another issue. But this situation here is something that would be interesting to look into further, and I think it shows a little bit of what's going on. Then if we go up to another century ahead, one whole century, fast forward again, we come across David Walker. And David Walker was quite an amazing person. And by the time he had settled here in Boston, his tract called the Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World is remarkable, and it almost, I'm starting to think that he's a predecessor in the Afro-pessimistic theorizing that's going on now. A lot of people, for those of you who are not familiar with Afro-pessimism as a school of thought, there are some key folks that you can search it up. But a lot of folks go back to the philosophical discussion of social death by Orlando Patterson. Frank Wilderson, really, he's accessible in his lectures and his writings about the ideas. And also Frantz Fanon as well. But I think that a deeper look into some of the ideas that are trying to get around the new vocabulary of anti-Blackness, as opposed to racism, as opposed to rights, as opposed to contingencies where you violate a law or something like that, but it's an existential death of slavery. And the afterlife of slavery is ongoing. But if you look at some of the writing that David Walker did, one exercise, I'm going to drag you through it, but one exercise that I like to do as a teacher, everything I learn I like to try to, or everything I try to I can get my hands on, I try to learn about. Yeah, you're not going to be able to read it, don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it. The idea is more important right here. So I take a text, if it's a new text that I've learned about, I put it in one cell, column, and then I try to go through and say, what is this person saying over here, okay? So one of the things that I found very interesting about different pieces, I didn't know what to cut out and not show, but the key thing with David Walker's appeal is that he is saying, I am not guilty of being black, okay? There is no such thing, which is revolutionary for this time period, okay? I'm not guilty for that, and I don't want to be white, okay? He's saying up here, they plunge us into misery and tell us that we're inferior and distinct, and that they will, do what they will with us. They will swallow us, kind of a cannibal kind of imagery. Fortune and misfortune, two inseparable companions lay rolled up in the wheel of events. Over here, it's a very interesting thing, and this is talking about magnitude. I love how David Walker gets into that idea that I was trying to bring out in the big data, in the time span of this. He notes over here, O my suffering brethren, remember the divisions and consequent sufferings of Carthage and Haiti. Read the history, particularly of Haiti, and see how they were butchered by the whites, okay? Now this is very interesting. Why would he bring up Carthage? Carthage wasn't African. It wasn't in Africa. It wasn't about Africans. Well, but yes, it was. And who was he reading to know about these things? And who was he following? Europe, America, E pluribus unum, from many one, right? That's hearkening back to Greco and Roman times. So he's taking a page maybe out of somebody's book who he's watching closely and saying, I'm hearkening back to BC, 300, 200, 300 BC, okay? Which is very, very interesting. The Romans ran around at the time saying, this saying, I don't know how to say it in Latin, but it was Carthago et delenda, which basically meant Carthage must be destroyed, completely, utterly destroyed. Now, the Afro-pessimism school, right now, they're stuck in the hold of the slave ship. But I posit that anti-blackness is something that has an even bigger magnitude. They're starting in their discussions to go back into the Arab slave trade, and then they're starting to look even further back. So this is something we need to keep our eyes on. And this idea from David Walker, like I said, it confirms it. Also, justice will come in due time, okay? Very, very interesting. This other piece that he talks about how we treat each other as Africans in the United States. Now, he had experience in the South, and he had experience in the North. And he says, ignorance as it now exists among us produces a state of things, oh my Lord, too horrible to present to the world. Any man who is curious to see the full force of ignorance developed among the colored people of the United States has only to go to the southern and western states of this confederacy. He's saying we are ignorant. We are full force ignorant. It's a remarkable phrasing of it. And he goes on to say, we might beat our mothers to death for a master. We might beat a pregnant wife to death for a master, to pacify the master. Our full force ignorance might even lead us to sell our own brothers into hell. So I'm imagining him talking about the Uncle Toms up here in North who are telling the deputies from the South after the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act, look, you can't be telling these people where we live or where our refugees are, runaway enslaved Africans are. What are you doing? So I think that's very interesting. And full force ignorance and servile defeat mean we will protect devils. Okay, he's talking something that might sound a little like Malcolm X in the early nation. Okay, and he's doing it in 130 years before him. And he says, do not trifle. He goes through, if you read his whole appeal, he goes through a talk about a slave caravan. I think it was leaving DC for the South, being sold down South. And he talks about Negro men and women were overtaking the slave coffle caravan that was being led and started to kill the people who were leading them on that trip. Well, what happened was one of them ratted out on them that this was going to happen or there was in it, and they turned on them, and so the balance of power turned. The coffle was recaptured, and he pointed that out as a horrible example of black disunity, which is fascinating. And this is why there was a price on his head in the South. This is why Southern governors were writing up to the Massachusetts governor saying, isn't there something you can do against muzzling the publication of this? So again, the interesting thing here is, I heard in a lecture one time, I'm not sure where it was, but a professor was talking about a situation on a slave plantation in the South. It was Freedom Day. The master had called everybody in. They heard the bell in the middle of the day, didn't know why they were being called in, and told them, you are as free as I am. And some slaves started dancing. Some slaves kind of looked worried and all of this. But one really intelligent slave asked, how free? How free? Okay, that's a very, very mature, incredible, beautiful statement. And this is the basic message that David Walker is asking. He's saying, these folks who call themselves Christians, they're saying that they're going to free you or that you are free in the North. But look into your freedom. How free are you really? When your property is precarious. It can be taken away at the drop of a dime. Your family, your filial state can be rearranged at any moment, and so forth. So that's the piece on David Walker. And I just wanted to see. Apologies, how much time I got left here? Okay, I got a few minutes. Okay, I'm going to leave it on this one, actually. What this, I'll try to blow it up a little bit. One of the Afro-pessimist professors at Berkeley, Fred Moten, noted something that he says, modernity is sutured by the hold, the slave ship hold. And I want to leave you with this thought, in that when we read about the beefing up of police's forces and the like, and when Eric Garner was choked to death and he couldn't breathe, there were policemen who actually came out from the union, doing the union side thing, wearing shirts that said, "I can breathe." Okay, so the young kids were coming out, Black Lives Matter, and this, I matter. And the Afro-pessimistic school is kind of looking at this and saying, it's not about rights, really. It's about existential viability, vulnerability. And the idea struck me from something. This is, it says, the Marlborough was making her escape. This is Shipboard Insurrections by Eric Robert Taylor. It's a clip from it. He says, he's talking about a slave rebellion off of West Africa. And he says, as this ship was making her escape, one of the remaining crew members jumped overboard and swam to the Hawk. It's another nearby slaver. What became of the Gold Coast slaves and the few surviving sailors on the vessel remains a mystery. Ironically, it was noted in an editorial commentary on the incident that Captain Codd has left a widow and 4 children and is much lamented, as he was a worthy, facetious, good-natured commander. Clearly, white readers were capable of understanding the tragedy inherent in a father being prematurely taken away from his family. However, the limits of whites' compassion and empathy are evidenced by the author's complete disregard in his account of the fact that Codd himself had attempted to tear more than 400 slaves permanently away from their families. So if we were to say, slave ship captains' lives matter, that is the genealogy that we see with cops' lives matter, or all lives matter as well. Okay, and this is something that in the last two speakers before me, the woman was saying that you all as historians, we as historians, we get so caught up in the work that the content that we're doing, that we don't know that the work that the content is doing on us, and that kind of visualize, not only just looking at something head on, but seeing through it, seeing around it, seeing from behind it, in all different ways, is really important work in what we're going to do. So I'm going to end it right there, and I welcome any questions or comments for this. Please.
Well, your presentation made me think about several things that are current. One is the movie 13th.
Yes, the 13th Amendment.
13th Amendment, and how the clause in it that allows for all the I guess you'd call it the prison industrial complex for Black people. Another thing is an article in the New Yorker probably about a month ago about a Black Panther who was put in solitary confinement for 46 years. I don't know if you've read that. Kept being retried on a different crime. And what happened to him, just look it up. And the third thing is the new horror movie, Get Out, by Jordan Peele, which is actually pretty profound in terms of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
The genealogy of anti-Blackness. So those are 3 things that
The Get Out is remarkable because of the sunken place.
That's
And
right.
if you ever tap into young black Twittergraphy, or what the area where they're meeting to talk about that, it is fascinating because where they're returning back to the hold,
That's right.
okay? And to have that visually come out, it's remarkable. It's a really interesting. I saw the movie, yeah. Okay, well, thank you. Oh, sorry.
Can you just tell me again the Facebook page where you're all trying to just transcribe? You said hidden history.
Hidden History of Black Boston.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Great. Well, thanks for taking of your time. Appreciate it. How do you think it went?
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Gabe. Thank you so much. Yes. I haven't looked at it, but I know about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wondering.
Do you know what the remarkable thing is? Oh, let me take this off. In 2013, they emancipated those people who were blind. So they actually had emancipation in 2013 from people from 1790 to some. That was the case along with the cases. They never emancipated a single black person in Massachusetts. I think we should have a bill that goes through retroactively, just like that emancipates, because all it was, you could walk around and still be procedures enslaved because it was court cases. So that's what I think about. I think that's great, and it, you know, it did it technically. It didn't do it.
Yeah, there are. I am not going to the opera. Where are you going? I'm going to involving communities, new communities.
Oh, that'll be.
Yeah.
Sounds like it's
Good, yeah.
See you at, don't leave without telling us.
Oh, yeah, no, that's the word out there.
Well,
And you asked the
there's
Bucks of
also a comment
Massachusetts
that
who-
Jeremy Belknap's,
All right, I'm going to Mackall.
piece says there was
See you there, Dale.
takers
There were some pockets of.
to the report, if you have a slave, don't say you have a slave.
What's been your favorite?
But the bigger issue is how did you acknowledge what it is?
Actually, I
How
went to
do I
both
make
of
sure
them.
this
So I
does
mean,
not
they're
happen?
both really interesting, but I think if I had to pick one, it would excuse me.
That's all right.
Yeah.
That's okay, take your time, we got time.
Yes, yes. I'm gonna post the presentation.
Yeah, I know, it's like really, let's see, oh, I did, another one that I liked was, good? Yes, it was really good.
Just want to say hello.
Yes, how are you doing? I saw you at,
Right.
But
It's clear that she wrote it, but I was
yeah.
You will.
I just started showing that adaptation and the places, and I just I just want to show it and have people find out what it
Yeah.
The majority of the docs went to
Yes.
this is
I'm just gonna go and start reading now. Okay, thank you.
You teach this?
Yeah, but that's adult education.
Oh, Barry versus Barry. Just looks very similar. That is what's it called? Accession process. Oh, this one's. I didn't know if you touched that against the wall, because it there's so much research. He was just. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Maggie asked it, yeah, and then, it just, we were black heritage, and we just redid. Acknowledging the mistakes we